Welcome to Canadian Justice. I'm Christine Van Gyn. On February 24th, Russia began a military invasion of Ukraine, launching attacks on multiple cities. The war has been devastating, with mounting evidence that the Russian military has committed war crimes and crimes against humanity. Many Ukrainian civilians are trapped in their cities, but many others have fled the country through neighboring Hungary and Poland. The UN estimates that over 4.3 million Ukrainians have fled the country and more than 6.5 million are displaced within Ukraine. What can Canada do, and what is Canada doing to bring Ukrainian refugees here? Canada has a large Ukrainian diaspora, and many Canadians have relatives trapped in or fleeing Ukraine. What is the process for bringing them here to Canada? And what's the process for bringing refugees here if they don't have relatives in Canada? Here today to discuss this are three guests. Larissa Waller is a political consultant who's been volunteering organizing assistance for Ukrainian refugees. Andy Semichuk is an immigration lawyer, and Sabine El-Shidiak works for the Institute for Liberal Studies. Thank you all so much for joining today. Andy, I'd like to start with you. You're an immigration lawyer, and you're working right now with people on the ground coming out of Ukraine. Can you describe what it's like for them leaving Ukraine into a neighboring country, and how are people managing? What are they leaving with, and where are they staying?
Okay, well, it's chaos, obviously, and the numbers are daunting. To draw an analogy, at the end of World War II, there were some 7 million to 11 million displaced persons that were spread around Europe at the end of the war. We're rising to that occasion, and there hasn't been anything similar since then. People leaving their country are short on funds, don't all have relatives and friends in neighboring countries, showing up at the border, waiting through long lines to try and get across, leaving their spouses behind who are fighting the war, trying to find a place to stay. There are pictures of people, massive stadiums full of people with cots, sleeping on cots. On top of that, there's the confusion of the war and the shock of everything. Even people in Canada are shocked by what happened. Can you imagine if you were called in a matter of minutes to pick up everything you got and take your children and get on a train and get out of the country? That's the situation in a nutshell.
It's truly unimaginable for so many people living here. Larissa, is there anything that you want to add about what it's like on the ground and the families that you've been in contact with trying to leave the conflict and make their way to Canada? What's their experience like?
Yeah, I think the experience it's scary. And most of the people leaving are mothers with young children. Most of the older people have decided a lot of the older people have decided to stay. The men between the ages of, I think, 18 and 60, thereabout, have to stay to serve. A lot of women are also staying, but the women, the people who are leaving are largely women with small children. I have small children, and I remember trying to leave the house. You don't want to forget a thing. And, diapers, formula, clothing, changes of clothes, and what if they get wet? And these people are leaving with, babies. They don't have, a 2-week supply of diapers or formula or food with them. They try to get to the border, mostly to the Polish border. For the first few days or first few weeks of the war, the wait to get out of the country was days long. You're waiting in a line for days to get out of the country, to get into Poland, where, God bless the Polish people. We hear that most Polish families have refugees staying with them. The families I've spoken to, they have 1 or 2 bags with them because the mother has to carry her children, push the stroller, and take all their belongings with them. I heard lots of stories of cars being abandoned on the side of the road, luggage just being dropped as they're walking towards the border. And they're walking, you couldn't get a car to the border, so you're walking 20 kilometers with your kids in tow. It's a horrific thing to think about. And those are sort of the reports I'm hearing. And I think we'll get into, some of the additional burdens that, say, our government has imposed on these refugees in order to come into Canada. But I'm looking forward to talking about that later in the show.
We've only got about 20 seconds left. Andy, is there a hard number on how many people have arrived in Canada so far?
12,000 roughly.
Okay, we've got to go to commercial break, but we will be right back. Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're discussing how we can bring Ukrainian refugees and immigrants to Canada in the wake of the war. Andy, I'd like to ask you about a new program that the government announced. This policy allows what they say is an unlimited number of approved Ukrainians to come to Canada for 3 years while they decide the next steps. It's through a tourism stream of immigration instead of the refugee stream. So what can you tell me about this policy and how it's been working so far?
Okay, excuse me. It's called the Canada-Ukraine Authorization for Emergency Travel. And essentially, it's a modified, as you pointed out, a modified visitor's application. And the essence of it is that you go online and you have to fill out a form providing documents such as copies of passports and birth certificates and whatever you can to establish that you want to come to Canada as, I guess, a visitor under this program. And once you've filed the application, there are no fees involved. They waived the fees, but you have to go through a biometrics appointment. So there's you have to find one of these VACs, these centers that do the biometrics, namely fingerprinting, and following that, so they can do a security clearance. You're told that you have to submit your passport to the consulate, whichever consulate it might be. Poland was overloaded. There are 4 principal consulates that are handling these things. So in Poland, it was Warsaw. Now it's Berlin, Vienna, and Bucharest. Those are the places where Canadian consulates will accept your passport and put in the visa plate that enables the person to travel to Canada. There are some exceptions pertaining to vaccinations for those that don't have vaccinations, where they can make it into Canada and follow a protocol to be healthy and safe, isolation and so on. And there are exceptions made for people such as those who don't have a passport or don't have a birth certificate or whatever. You just basically have to explain what's going on. The essence is you have to produce a passport, or if you don't have a passport, some ID document, and you may be issued a travel document, one-time entry document to Canada. It's labor intensive. It's a challenging mix of questions that you have to, resurrect your history, your travel history, your family, and so on. And in my view, it's overburdening. It's something that need not be done. As I gather, and we may get into this in a little bit more, the House of Commons has voted to suggest to the government that there be a visa-free protocol be established for Ukrainians to come on a visa-free basis with the use of the ETA sort of screening system of questions to ensure that there are no security or criminal or medical challenges for people coming in. That's hoping the way they'll go.
Now, Sabine, I want to talk about this tourism stream, because what's interesting is that, these people leaving Ukraine are clearly refugees. They're leaving a war zone with, in some cases, nothing. So why are they being funneled through this tourism stream instead of creating a refugee stream for them or using the existing refugee stream for them?
You're right. That's it would be better. I understand that this is an emergency stream. So any kind of program that allows for people to get here faster and more efficiently is great, especially in a crisis situation that Ukrainians are experiencing right now. There are some deficiencies to this way of doing things, however. for example, on top of a lot of the things that Andy just mentioned, it's not a permanent program. There's no pathway to permanent residency in this program. After 3 years, it's up. So that's one deficiency that we have in this program. The other is that they're not offered everything that refugees are offered when they first arrive in Canada. One of the things that are missing is the healthcare, the federal healthcare that is offered to refugees when they arrive that they so need when they first get to Canada. Mental health, just to tackle the mental health issues, to tackle any health issues that they have arriving in the country. They're downloading that onto the provinces. This is now a provincial thing. Ontario is stepping up to do something on that, but there is that deficiency as well.
We have to go to commercial break, but when we come back, I want to ask Larissa about some of the experiences of people who have already arrived. Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're discussing the Ukrainian refugee crisis and what the Canadian government is doing or failing to do to help Ukrainian refugees. Now, Larissa, about 12,000 people have already arrived in Canada from Ukraine. Once they get here, what community supports are available to them? Sabine had mentioned that there is in the short term, at least, there has been a lack of health care provided for people who are arriving from Ukraine. Are there economic supports? Where are people staying once they get here? Is it relying on people's families if you have Ukrainian family? And what about people who don't have family in Canada who are arriving?
Yeah, so I'll back up a little bit and talk about how you can get here. When Andy brought up the biometric scans, that is the most cumbersome part of the process. And you need to have a permanent address or a secure address to where you are. This is important because if you've already done your biometric scans in the last 10 years, although I think they've only had them for about 2 years, you can come without doing that. Most of those people are people who've been to Canada before, who have family somewhere to come. So of those 9,000 people that are already here, most of them have familial ties to Canada. So they're coming to Canada with somewhere to go. Very few people in Canada, sorry, of that 12,000, very few people of the 12,000 are randomly matched people who just pick Canada as the place they want to go. Virtually all of them have a tie to Canada, and that's how they've gotten here so quickly. Once they're here, Sabine's right, the federal government has not provided any social supports to these refugees. They won't even call them refugees, which means that the provinces have had to step up. And so you saw the provinces kind of holding back for the first few weeks. Are the feds going to do something? Aren't they going to do something? And Ontario, obviously, the biggest province in the country, yesterday or the day before, sometime this week, they announced an allocation of $300 million to support Ukrainian refugees or displaced persons coming to Canada. That means healthcare coverage, pharma coverage. It means income support, temporary shelter, mental health support, job placement support. All of those things are great. But again, those refugees have to get here to be able to access them. And there are still so many hurdles that the federal government could fix that they're choosing not to.
Andy, one of the things Sabine pointed out is that this is a temporary program. It gives people 3 years in Canada, and then what? Can they apply to stay longer in Canada? Could they claim asylum in Canada? Is that an option?
Yeah, there are programs that you can transition to from this program. An example might be the Canadian Experience class, where if you have 1 year of experience in a high-level working environment, you could apply to get permanent residence. Another could be claiming refugee status. That is a possibility. There are others. You could start studying something and then move from studying to a work permit and ultimately a permanent residence in Canada. So it is possible to transition. That part is good about what exists in terms of once you arrive. And thankfully, like Larissa mentioned, the holes pertaining to supports are being filled by the provinces, Ontario naming one, to name one. Quebec, Manitoba, Saskatchewan have also declared they have programs. So in a sense, once the people have arrived and once these programs are up and running, because a lot of it is still in process, once they're up and running, it appears that there will be ways for people who want to stay longer to be able to adjust or change their status to be able to stay.
Sabine, one of the things we've been talking a lot about is the struggles in getting them here in the first place, though. So how can people who are in Ukraine get information about making their way to Canada? How do they access those immigration services if, for example, they're in a refugee camp and don't have a phone or documentation?
Usually refugees if in a formal camp can actually reach out to somebody that's working there from the United Nations. They'll have that information for them. They'll guide them through that process. It's not clear cut. It's very difficult, especially when you're fleeing without all of your documents. There's some red tape that you have to get through a lot of the time. And that's unfortunate. All of this is supposedly accessible over the internet, but as you can imagine, the internet is not that accessible. But if you can get a hold of somebody who's working in an official capacity, that's one way to do it. As for after they arrive here, settlement services, that's something that they have to also seek on their own. So I really encourage them to do that when they arrive in Canada.
We've got to go to commercial break, but we will be right back. Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're discussing Ukrainian refugees who are making their way to Canada. Now, Sabine, what is available in terms of private sponsorship programs for immigrants? I know that during the Syrian refugee crisis, many Syrians were brought to Canada through this program. How can it be used to help Ukrainian refugees? And how do people apply to help a family through private sponsorship?
Yes, so very quickly, the private sponsorship program is something that started in 1979, and it taps into the generosity of Canadians in that sponsorship agreement holders, which are usually religious, cultural, or organizations, or just organizations put together for this purpose, can actually put together the funds to bring a refugee or a refugee family to Canada, and they take care of them financially and emotionally for the first year or so that they live here. And we find that the outcomes are great amongst privately sponsored refugees, often surpassing the outcomes of government-assisted refugees because they have that community support. So it's a great way to bring Ukrainians to Canada if you're able to. Sponsorship agreement holders have a lot of issues bringing people in. They have caps that they have to deal with. Each sponsorship agreement holder has a cap they have to adhere to. They can't even apply right now until May. So they have a lot of hoops they have to jump through. There's also an individual way that you don't have to be part of a group. You can just be a group of five. Just 5 people can come together and raise the funds necessary and go through that. Unfortunately, there are some hurdles with that as well, in that they, unlike sponsorship agreement holders, they have to actually get a designation from the United Nations that these people are designated as a refugee. And that is, as you can imagine, very difficult. The United Nations is very busy right now. So they're not exactly doing it in an efficient way. And when you're in a time of crisis like the Ukrainians are, you really don't have time for that sort of thing. So it's not really that necessary.
You mentioned a group of 5 raising the funds. What are the funds involved? Like, what would this cost to work to be a private sponsor?
It is a significant investment because you are providing for 12 months of income support and some startup costs. So you have to have that apartment ready, the furniture ready, and all of that. It comes up to around $16,000 for one refugee, and if you're looking at a family of 4, it's about $28,000, and that's why sponsorship agreement holders rely on their community to raise that money. And a lot of the times, when a group of 5 is doing it, those 5 people have been able to raise the money amongst themselves or have asked for help from family and friends. So just to show that you can take care of the refugee and refugee family when they get here for a year or more.
Andy, what can you tell me about the private sponsorship program, and is it going to be available for Ukrainian refugees?
I'm afraid it's not something that's on the horizon as far as I can see. The processing times, the times that it takes to bring someone over is a real source of concern. And we're going to need something more immediate. Something like what was done by the government in the Vietnamese times, where they flew immigration officials overseas and put up a sign saying, if you are interested in Canada, come and see us. And then they would check to see if these people had some kind of connection to Canada, such as a relative or a friend, and then process them right on the spot, put them on a plane and fly the whole bunch over to Canada. Something of that nature would be more in line with what's needed because of the immediate pressures involved with, like 2 million people in Poland. You can imagine if you've ever had a guest or relative stay at your house, after a week or two, you start wondering, so imagine if you had 2 million or more. And so I would look more in that direction than, it's God bless their souls for private sponsorships. I'm not against them. It's just, I don't think it's a realistic resolution to a problem that is a NATO problem, basically.
That's all the time we have today. Sabine, Andy, Larissa, I want to thank you all so much for coming on today to share your expertise about this fascinating and really important topic. We've heard today about how Canadian refugee and immigration law is responding and isn't responding to the crisis in Ukraine, about the nightmare Ukrainian refugees are enduring, fleeing a war of aggression, and about the struggles in getting those Ukrainian refugees to Canada. Is the current program enough, or does more need to be done? And what can you do to help people fleeing this war, many of them women and young children? You be the judge. Thanks for watching, and remember, a freer Canada starts with you.